Hi guys, and welcome back to Switch Up. A big thanks to the developers for giving us the review copy of this one. It's one we've been really interested in. 1982's The Dark Crystal is a film from Jim Henson. Having watched the Netflix series set in and around the same universe, I felt it only proper to go back and watch the original film. Now, one of my favourites from the mid to late 80s as a child was Labyrinth. Yes, I know it's terrible, but Bowie though, awesome. Dance, anyway. What I didn't realise is that Jim Henson and Frank Oz created that world, and it explains the familiarity and dark, foreboding undertones in both of these respective worlds. The game takes this universe but leans more towards the recent Netflix reimagining, which acts as a prequel to the original film. With the history lesson done, it's time to jump into the dark world of Gelflings and Skeksis in what's hopefully a worthy tactical adventure. Let's find out. The world of Thra is a synergistic planet where the beings' very lives are tied to the titular crystal that is watched over by the bird-like Skeksis. Hideous, vulture-like beings who claim to tend and care for this crystal, but who in actuality are draining its essence to fuel their own quest for eternal lives. The game begins just as they've discovered a method to sustain the crystal's power in an even darker way, and just as the series, you'll be required to fight your way out of this. Story relies heavily on your knowledge of the film and TV series, almost to a fault at times. It felt like having watched the series was essential, and in all honesty, it's much more rewarding an experience when framed by the Netflix original. Many of the battles have some on-screen text-based exposition. However, this could certainly end up a touch confusing without that prior knowledge. Regardless though, the core idea of why you're doing what you are is made clear at the beginning of the game, and there are some big story moments that are handled well. It was more the middle and end where details are brushed over in favour of moving events forward swiftly, potentially at the expense of a new to the series player. The overworld map is a simplistic overview of which missions are available and those that you've finished, with story quests shown in purple and generally taking place in a strictly linear order. Tactical turn-based combat is the heart of the game. These are usually set up with a short story text and in you go. Maps are relatively small to begin with, but do increase in size and complexity. Before you begin, you'll be placing a predetermined number of troops, the locations of which are quite arbitrary, and the real decision here will be which of your units you'll be bringing, as you can rarely bring them all, and there are 14 of these to unlock throughout the 50 or so missions. Once combat begins, your objective is usually to wipe out the enemy. However, there are a few occasions where you'll be flipping switches or defeating a more powerful adversary or even rescuing someone. Now, your troops begin as one of 3 distinct classes: soldiers, menders or scouts, each of which have their own specific set of skills and which are designed to work synergistically together. Take the Scout's Mark skill. This then opens the door for specific, more powerful soldier damage to be done to the enemy. Menders will be able to buff your troops or cast shields, with the Scouts having a range of offensive and defensive capabilities. Now, if the system were simply this shallow, then I would tell you to pass this one up. But thankfully, as you reach level 5, you'll have the option to add a secondary job to your troops roster, which allows for a multitude of new possibilities when in combat. All of a sudden, your soldier can heal, which is a game changer. Or conversely, you can make your healer a melee presence within the combat. You won't be restricted to these 3 classes either. As you advance into the higher levels, you can then unlock even more advanced jobs, which come with new skills. The tactical element then comes from choosing those skills wisely, as only 3 of your primary job and 2 from your side can then be equipped, with many familiar powers, such as Dream Fasting to restore your magical energy. Movement options are shown in blue, with the turn order shown at the top. Players will be able to move and use one skill. Skipping turns is sometimes a viable strategy to draw enemies into an area or line them up for a tactical push, and I enjoyed the combat most when the basic formula was mixed up. Some levels, as mentioned, take place between more than 2 groups of enemies, and they may engage each other in combat. Further into the game, and you'll begin to unlock new creatures who might aid you in battle, and These in turn have their own unique specific skills, levels and abilities. After each victorious round, you'll gain a number of crystals and other unlocks, including players and other weapons. The inventory management, player leveling and purchasing new items and gear are all handled from a simple, no-nonsense overworld map. I did find the cost of new gear a touch prohibitive, but this is offset by the ability to level and gem grind via replayable side ones, which pop up from time to time to enable the player who is keen to do so the option, and rarely was this essential to your progression, as most tougher fights have a strategic rather than a random way to win them, which in itself is commendable. Now, one notable thing for me was how fast combat was. I was surprised, pleasantly, how slick and quick it is to carry out moves, and controls are easy. The use of the right stick to completely control the camera was a really smart design choice, and makes navigating and rotating much smoother than something like the recent Warhammer games I've reviewed. Elevation is one more strategic element, with some skills allowing for the player to fly to reach these areas or jump greater heights. Add in the ability to push or ram your enemies into traps or overpower a stronger opponent without risking your weaker units, and there is a good deal of strategy to find. Overall then, I am really impressed with what they've produced at the price they're asking in terms of gameplay and depth. I would personally recommend playing through on hard mode from the start though, as without it, the first half of the game can be ploughed through without too much hassle. I wish they'd perhaps put a touch more delivery in the story, particularly when you consider the monstrous budget that Netflix has to hand. It was just a touch lacking in that area. I guess they offset that with the reasonable price, and as a companion game, it put the emphasis primarily on the combat, which will please some and potentially alienate others. Gameplay's fun and quite slick, and scores 16 out of 20. While the controls are very good, they score 18 out of 20. Visually the game's decent and Jason Salenbach has done a good job, but once again I felt they could have gone a little further with the source material they've got to hand. Characters and portraits are nice and the game runs at 30 frames per second for the most part and runs well in both modes, but there are the occasional small stutters. I've not experienced any crashes or serious bugs, which is good. Some of the best visual moments are where key materials or scenes from the film are adopted and placed at the centre of a stage. The different regions are reflected in combat, and you do feel that the developers have tried to stick with the source material with a good deal of detail to be found in some of these, while others are decidedly and quite starkly drab in contrast. Still, for the most part, I enjoy the visuals and at their best, they're quite vibrant. Credit to the artists for doing the different clans and in particular creatures justice. They're all here and recognisable. One real negative for the Switch version, and a constantly overlooked by developers element, is font size. Why oh why did the testers not say, hey, unless I am literally Superman or sitting 3 inches from the screen, I can't quite read that. Can we have an option to increase the font size? But alas, they don't, and that is a miss. It's workable, but it's annoying, and it needs to not be a thing on Nintendo Switch games anymore in any form. Audio's absolutely outstanding. The musical score is simply lovely. After the disappointment I've had with the absolutely amazing, don't get me wrong, it's amazing, Dragon Quest XI in the musical department, they nailed it here. Tracks are rousing and epic, but never feel too overbearing. You can turn down the music if you feel the need to, but it's spot on, and each battle has a suitably fitting track for the environments at hand. Less than stellar are some of the in-game sounds. Cries from enemies are a touch off, and some other combat ones could have just been better. They're not bad per se, they're just a little unusual. Visuals score 16 out of 20 overall, while the audio scores, mainly based on the amazing music, 17 out of 20. The game's going to set you back £16.99, €17.99 or $19.99, and at this price, I'd say it's spot on for value. At a harder difficulty, the 50 or so levels are going to take you, well, at my pace, around about 15 to 25 hours. But in all honesty, you might be better than me, and I have been playing the game on hard, so excuses. I already feel like I've got more than the asking price in value though, with a few missions still to overcome. 50 is a deceptive figure, as the grinding missions can be undertaken repeatedly if you so choose. I enjoy this genre and I think they've done an admirable job here with such a big name. What I will say is that you can't help but feel that a physical release should almost be mandatory, but once again on Switch it's lacking, which is disappointing. Overall, I give value 16 out of 20. If you're a fan of the series and strategy, you'll love this one. If you've not seen it, then I would recommend it, as it's going to heighten your enjoyment here as you lead the revolution against the nefarious Skeksis. It scores an overall switch-up score of 83%. A big thanks to the developer for the review copy. If you enjoy the game, well, buy it. Let us know down in the comments what you think of it. And a big thanks to our patrons. We've had a few new ones once again, and your names will be on the screen after the Switch Up logo. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch Up. Cheers, guys. See ya!